Das war ein Befehl! Der Angriff Steiners war ein Befehl!
She was just 19 when she swore loyalty to Adolf Hitler. For decades, she stayed silent, afraid of being hunted, tried, or worse. Now, at 96, she's ready to confess everything. What she saw, what she did, and what she regrets more than anything. But are we ready to hear it? She was 17 when 3 SS checkpoints swallowed her name and spit her into the hidden core of Nazi Germany. No uniform, no gun. Just an apron and a lie she believed, that she was going to clean a quiet mountain guest house. What she didn't know was that beyond those iron gates, history's most intimate horrors were being planned over porcelain teacups and midnight arguments that rattled the walls like ghosts. She stayed silent for 80 years, but silence rots if you keep it too long. And hers is finally breaking. Imagine being a girl from Salzburg, pockets empty, the world burning around you, and someone says there's work in the Alps. It sounds peaceful, safe, far from the front lines. Elisabeth Kalhammer thought she'd dust windows and serve soup. Instead, she served a monster whose shadow still poisons how we talk about evil today. She watched him tremble behind closed doors, saw staff vanish without a trace, and felt every breath of fear that wallpapered the halls. You think you know Hitler's fortress, but there's a piece no textbook ever taught you. I'll get to that. Before this story ends, you'll see why she never spoke a word, and why, at 99, she finally did. Because what Elisabeth remembers about the Berghof tears a hole right through the myth we've been sold. But to understand her truth, you have to follow her footsteps, through that last checkpoint, up the winding road, and into a house dressed like paradise, but pulsing with dread. Stay with me. There's one thing she saw that no historian ever recorded, but I promise we'll get there. It started with an ad in a local paper. Maid wanted. Location: Berghof, Obersalzberg. No mention of whose house it was, no hint that the walls were stained with secrets too dangerous for anyone to carry. For a 17-year-old in wartime Austria, it sounded simple. Clean, serve, send money home. The mountains promised calm. The job promised routine. But the first crack in that promise appeared the moment Elisabeth passed through the second checkpoint and saw the rifles glinting under the cold sun. She told herself it was normal. Germany was at war, after all. But deep down, something stiffened in her spine that never relaxed again. By the time the third gate locked behind her, innocence had no place to hide. The Berghof rose from the snowy hillside like a grand hotel carved out of a nightmare. Wide glass windows framed a view so perfect it could have been painted, an illusion of peace floating above a Europe ripping itself apart. Inside, polished floors reflected the boots of men who made decisions that bled entire nations dry. No one smiled for long. Laughter was rationed more strictly than sugar. Elisabeth tried to be invisible, just another girl in an apron. But she felt the eyes, some indifferent, some calculating, all watching. There were rules she never signed up for. Speak only when spoken to. Never look the Führer in the eyes. Forget what you see or you won't last the week. But she was 17. She didn't understand yet how a fortress keeps its prisoners without a single iron bar. Not yet. There was still one thing she hadn't seen: the truth behind the pretty curtains. But trust me, we're almost there. The Berghof wasn't guarded by stone walls or watchtowers. It was caged by silence. From her first morning, Elisabeth felt the tension threaded through every hallway like hidden wire. Rooms were cleaned in precise order, footsteps softened against polished floors, and small talk was a risk no one could afford. At 17, she understood one thing clearly. Asking questions here could erase you. One day, a maid folded napkins beside her. The next day, her bed was stripped bare, and her name never spoken again. No explanations, no goodbyes, just absence, as sharp as gunfire. Fear made the house run like clockwork. Meals appeared at exact times, linens pressed smooth enough to reflect the faces above them. Hitler's presence seeped into every corridor, even when he was miles away. Servants rehearsed their movements the way soldiers drill commands, backs straight, eyes lowered, voices swallowed whole. To stumble over a plate or knock over a vase wasn't an accident. It was an offense that could invite a silent punishment. The other staff called it the air changing. When the Führer entered a room, you felt it in your bones before you saw him. What no one dared whisper was the truth Elizabeth learned quickly. Control didn't come from discipline, but from paranoia so thick it poisoned every breath. She polished furniture that had heard secrets about entire countries. She dusted mantels beneath stolen paintings that hid meetings about death camps. She caught glimpses, maps rolled out at dawn, uniforms smelling of ash, arguments behind closed doors. And through it all, she knew better than to let her eyes linger. But there was one night when that invisible leash slipped for just a moment. That night would follow her for the next 80 years. And yes, we're getting closer to it. Up close, Hitler wasn't the iron figure splashed across Nazi posters. He was fragile, rigid, and haunted by an enemy no army could shoot down: his own mind. Elizabeth watched him glide down the hallway, posture bent just slightly, lips pressed thin as if containing something rotten behind his teeth. His hands, the same hands that signed off on unthinkable cruelty, trembled when he lifted a teacup. Some nights, she heard him pacing alone, muttering fragments no propaganda reel would dare record. Behind the myth of control was a man stitched together by syringes and pills. Historians later confirmed what she only saw in glimpses. His doctor, Theodore Morell, kept him on a cocktail of stimulants, sedatives, hormones, even cocaine eye drops. The effect was grotesque. He'd bark orders with wild eyes 1 hour, then drift half-silent the next. His speech slurred, his rage burning in short, sudden sparks over nothing. A napkin folded wrong, a door left ajar. Elizabeth carried trays past these outbursts, head lowered, breath shallow. In these moments, the master strategist looked more like a man unraveling beneath the weight of his own obsession. He demanded absolute routine. Meals at precise hours. Water neither too cold nor too warm. Wallpaper colors chosen to calm his frayed nerves. Every precaution screamed the same truth. Power doesn't mean fearlessness. Often, it means living terrified of losing control. And if the Führer himself could be this breakable, what hope did the staff have? Elizabeth learned that lesson in whispers behind her door, but the worst revelation didn't come from what she saw. It came from what she overheard one night when the walls failed to hold in the regime's darkest panic. That moment is almost here. If Hitler was the crumbling spine of the Berghof, Eva Braun was its velvet mask. To new maids like Elizabeth, she seemed disarmingly warm, offering smiles, compliments on crisp uniforms, even gentle questions about family back home. But kindness at the Berghof was currency, not comfort. Elizabeth learned quickly that Eva's attention was a surveillance system hidden behind perfume and pearls. A careless word to Eva could find its way straight to Hitler's ear before breakfast. She ruled the domestic theater with a precision that mirrored the paranoia dripping from the man she adored. She chose when rooms would be cleaned, what flowers would greet guests, and what fabric draped the dinner tables where men plotted death in polite German. Her jewelry sparkled under chandelier light, rings and necklaces too extravagant to be gifts, pieces likely stripped from families who vanished into the Reich's machinery. Elizabeth never asked where they came from. She didn't have to. In a house where you could disappear for folding a napkin wrong, jewelry told its own story. What disturbed Elizabeth most wasn't the luxury, but the contradiction. Eva hosted garden parties, while bombs cratered cities below the Alps. She danced in silk dresses paid for by other people's stolen lives. And when Hitler raged in the next room, she alone could calm him with a touch on his arm or a carefully placed word. Some historians call this complicity through comfort. Elizabeth didn't have a word for it back then. She just knew one rule: never confuse Eva Braun's smile for safety. Because behind her laughter was the same void that swallowed anyone who made the mistake of believing this fortress had a heart. And yet, even Eva's rehearsed elegance couldn't muffle what Elizabeth heard one night through the walls, a night that broke every silence she'd kept buried for decades. Wait for it. We're nearly there. One night, long past midnight, Elizabeth pressed her back against a corridor wall, frozen in place by the voices bleeding through thick oak doors. Hitler, Goebbels, Himmler. 3 architects of nightmare, their whispers sharp, their shouts spilling over each other like knives drawn in panic. She wasn't meant to hear any of it. Staff were forbidden from even lingering near that wing after dusk. But the walls of the Berghof, built to protect secrets, betrayed their masters just this once. What she caught wasn't strategy. It was desperation. They argued about the extermination camps, how to sustain them, how to hide them, how to twist what could no longer be hidden as the war began to turn against them. No documents recorded this fight. No official minutes survived. Only Elizabeth's heartbeat pounding in her ears, trying to make sense of words she only fully understood years later when the world learned what Auschwitz truly meant. The next morning, corridors smelled of fresh polish, coffee steamed in porcelain cups, and the snow on the balconies sparkled like nothing had happened. But something had cracked behind those locked doors. The regime's mask of control slipped in the pitch-black hush of a mountain fortress. One by one, staff who worked closest to that wing disappeared. No explanations, just emptied rooms and scrubbed names. Elizabeth didn't need anyone to spell it out. She knew her silence was her only protection. If she repeated what she heard, she wouldn't be alive to regret it. This single, hidden memory, an overheard confession of genocide unraveling in panic, would fester in her chest for decades. And the reason she kept it buried for so long has more to do with survival than courage. Because sometimes, staying alive means swallowing the truth whole and hoping history chokes on it before you do. But when she turned 99, time forced her hand. And that decision to finally speak changed everything she thought she'd carry alone to her grave. For decades after the war ended, Elizabeth Kalhammer lived like a shadow of her younger self. Married, working modest jobs, paying bills, raising a family that knew only fragments of what she had survived on that mountain. She never wrote memoirs, never gave interviews, never leaned in at family dinners to hint that she'd dusted Hitler's desk or heard the panic of the regime's final nights echoing through stone walls. Silence was safer than memory. Speaking out in post-war Austria risked more than gossip. It risked being branded a collaborator, Or worse, reopening scars in neighbors who still whispered names no one wanted in the daylight. But silence has a weight that grows heavier than fear when time runs short. Nearing a century of life, her bones frail but her mind sharp as ever, Elizabeth made herself one promise. Before I die, I must speak. So she did. Her account was never about fame. It was about emptying her chest of the dread that had curled there since she was 17, when she realized that in the heart of evil, ordinary people become witnesses who carry the evidence long after bullets stop flying. When historians finally heard her version, it changed more than timelines. It exposed the human contradiction that regimes like Hitler's depend on. An army of people too scared to resist, too trapped to flee, yet too honest to forget. Her story, trivial in some eyes, a maid's recollections of folded linens and secret meetings, cuts deeper than military maps and battle dates. It proves that terror doesn't just exist in grand speeches or tanks rolling across borders. It festers behind polished doors, enforced by those who smile while watching, and by those too frightened to do anything but watch back. Elizabeth's final words, caught on tape at 99, ring more relevant today than ever. I wasn't brave then. I was careful. But the truth doesn't die just because you bury it. That truth is hers no longer. Now it's ours to carry, and ours to guard against silence, masquerading as peace. History likes its villains carved in marble, unshakable tyrants, whose downfall feels clean, inevitable, distant. But Elizabeth Kalhammer's life reminds us that power's true shape is far more fragile and far more terrifying. Behind the speeches and flags was a man hunched over a pastry at midnight, trembling from drugs while dictating death sentences. Behind him stood a woman wearing stolen diamonds, arranging flowers as entire cities burned. And behind both, a young maid memorizing details she was never meant to survive, let alone confess. What makes her story so haunting isn't the scale of what she saw, but its intimacy. She dusted the furniture where genocide was mapped out. She carried plates past generals whose boots dripped mud and worse. She heard secrets no courtroom ever summoned her to repeat. And for nearly 80 years, the world never asked, because we prefer the myth. The clean lines of cause and consequence, the easy labels of evil and innocence. But people like Elizabeth proved that history breathes through the unnoticed. The maids, the cooks, the drivers who carry rooms full of truth long after their masters rot in graves. They are living archives, walking contradictions. And when they speak, if we're wise, we listen. Because next time, silence might not last 80 years. It might last just long enough for us to pretend it never happened at all. If her voice stirred something in you, don't let it settle back into the noise. Share her memory. Ask who else is cleaning rooms we pretend don't exist. And remember, behind every regime's polished door is someone watching, praying they live long enough to tell what they saw. Elizabeth Kalhammer didn't rewrite history from a podium or with a pen. She did it by surviving long enough to whisper what the polished reports and tidy documentaries forgot to say. She reminds us that behind every headline are small lives forced to stand too close to monsters. And sometimes it's their quiet truth that exposes the cracks no archive can hold shut forever. This isn't just her story. It's a reminder that the line between ordinary and unthinkable is thinner than we like to believe. A 17-year-old girl, a fortress in the Alps, a dictator trembling behind locked doors. None of it feels so distant when you understand that power is always fragile and fear is always loyal. If you stayed until the end, you're already different from most. Now ask yourself, what secrets are still buried behind locked doors today, waiting for the last witness to decide they've been silent long enough? Share this truth while there's still someone left to listen. Because once the eyes are gone, all that's left is the myth, and we've seen how dangerous that can be.